I was minding my own business, sipping my lukewarm coffee and scrolling through memes like a true expert in procrastination, when the most absurd thing happened. 1 second, I was alone in my apartment, the kind of lonely you get used to after years of binge-watching sci-fi and imagining someone, anyone, understanding your weird jokes. The next second, there she was, floating in the air, no bigger than my thumb, wings fluttering like a hummingbird hopped up on caffeine, staring at me with eyes far too serious for something that size. I blinked. Blinked again. Hello? I said, because apparently humans speak first and question later. The tiny alien cocked her head and made a sound that was somewhere between a squeaky whistle and a coo, then zipped around my coffee cup in dizzying circles. I almost knocked it over, which would have been catastrophic if she were fragile, but clearly she wasn't. She landed on the edge of my desk and hovered there, tiny fists on her hips, like she was judging me for my lack of organization, or my life choices. Maybe both. Before I could even process what I was seeing, a strange, tingling warmth washed over me, starting in my chest and spreading outward. My first thought was, great. Heart attack. That's exactly what I need right now. But then the tingling became a weirdly pleasant pull, like someone was tugging gently at my soul, whispering, pay attention to me. And if I thought I was about to faint, I didn't. I just froze, staring at this ridiculous, thumb-sized creature who had apparently decided that I was now important to her mission, whatever that mission was. It turns out, mission is a complicated word for her species, because she buzzed around me, poking at my shirt, sniffing my coffee, and occasionally bouncing on my keyboard like she owned it. I had no idea if she was hostile, friendly, or just extremely curious, but she was intensely focused, and every so often she emitted a series of high-pitched chirps that sounded suspiciously like laughter. Somehow, I felt both flustered and oddly flattered. Okay, I don't even know your name, I muttered. Or your species. Or are you a spy? Should I be scared? She paused mid-air, wings vibrating, and then she did the most insane thing. She landed on my shoulder and leaned forward, her tiny face inches from mine, and telepathically, yes, telepathically, whispered, "You are mine." I nearly fell out of my chair. My brain scrambled for an appropriate response. Mine? Wait, what does that mean? Are we dating? Are you proposing? I'm not sure this is legally binding. She tilted her head again, tiny antennae twitching, and chirped in a way that translated, in my head, to "it is now." At this point, I had two options: scream, faint, or just roll with it. My decision-making skills being what they are, I did the last one. Somehow, somewhere in the galaxy, she had accidentally imprinted on me as a mate instead of completing whatever spying mission she had been sent for. And now here I was, facing a tiny alien scout who had declared me hers, in a way that was equal parts terrifying, exhilarating, and absolutely ridiculous. Things escalated quickly. One moment I was trying to type an email to my boss, the next moment she zipped into my shirt pocket, chirping and kicking my phone across the room, presumably because she didn't approve of work distractions. I tried negotiating with her, pointing at my coffee cup, waving my hands, pleading with my voice. Nothing worked. She was relentless. And yet, between the chaos, there was this undeniable charm. I couldn't stop smiling, even when she flew upside down around my head, wings buzzing like tiny turbines, and landed on my nose to inspect my face for approval. By the time the sun was setting, I realized that something had shifted. I didn't just think she was cute or fascinating, tiny as she was, with those enormous eyes that somehow conveyed a universe of emotion. I was smitten. It was absurd. I was a grown adult, and I was deeply, inexplicably attracted to a creature smaller than my thumb who could probably bench press a pencil. But there it was, the pull, the connection, the ridiculous magnetic chaos of it all. Later, I found myself sitting on the couch, holding her in my palm, feeling the warmth of her tiny body, her wings fluttering against my fingers like delicate silk. She chirped softly, almost like a contented sigh, and I realized that despite the absurdity, despite the potential intergalactic consequences, this was nice. comforting even. And maybe a little exciting in a way that made me question every other dating choice I had made in my life. And that was how it started, a tiny alien scout, sent to spy, somehow turning my life upside down and setting the stage for an interspecies romance that would make anyone else question their sanity. I didn't know how it would go, or what the next morning would bring, but I did know one thing for certain. My life would never be normal again, and I was kind of okay with that. Because, honestly, who else gets to say they've been claimed by a thumb-sized alien spy before breakfast? And who else would end up laughing, panicking, and inexplicably falling for one at the same time? Not many. But apparently, I was one of the lucky ones. I thought surviving a tiny alien claiming me as hers was the peak of absurdity. I was very, very wrong. Apparently, imprinting isn't just a polite suggestion for her species. It's more like a cosmic contract that includes offspring. Somehow, in the middle of our awkward bonding and the chaos of me figuring out how to make coffee without squashing her, there was a miscalculation in the alien reproductive protocols, and suddenly there was a tiny hybrid being with my DNA and hers. I woke up to a glow in the corner of the room, the unmistakable outline of something floating. My first thought was fire. My second thought was, oh God, this is definitely going to require a fire extinguisher. Then I realized it was a baby. A baby that was barely bigger than a pencil, glowing faintly, hovering like a helium balloon, and emitting a series of high-pitched gurgles that translated, in the telepathic weirdness I'd somehow acquired, to feed me, amuse me, entertain me. The tiny alien scout, my partner, apparently, hovered beside me, wings twitching nervously. She was muttering rapid chirps and clicks, which I eventually decoded as something like, "You are now parent. Congratulations. Do not fail." Parent? Fail? I was still trying to figure out how to not spill my cereal on her wings, and now I was responsible for this floating alien miniature who looked suspiciously like a cross between a jelly bean and a glow stick. Breakfast became a nightmare of cosmic proportions. I tried offering oatmeal. The baby glared telepathically, and the alien scout swooped in, squeaking something about plasma nutrient spheres. I didn't even know those were a thing. She zipped off into the kitchen, muttering something about interdimensional food preparation, leaving me holding a spoon and muttering, "I can barely boil water without setting off the smoke detector." The baby floated in front of me, arms crossed, clearly unimpressed. I suddenly realized that negotiating with a tiny telepathic hybrid might be the most difficult thing I'd ever done. Changing diapers, or whatever the alien equivalent was another fiasco. The scout insisted on using biofilament wraps instead of cloth, which glowed slightly and apparently needed a precise hum to activate properly. I hummed like an idiot, holding the baby, hoping I was doing it correctly. The baby floated upside down, giggling, or was that crying? And I realized I had no idea. Nothing about this situation was in my human parenting handbook. Even Google couldn't help me. Despite the chaos, there were moments that made me laugh and blush simultaneously. The tiny scout would hover around, occasionally brushing my cheek with her little wingtip in a way that made me hyper-aware of her imprinting and very adult attraction. Meanwhile, the baby would do this mischievous thing where it bounced around like a miniature trampoline, glowing brightly whenever it was pleased, which somehow made our already tiny apartment feel like a nightclub for creatures under 6 inches. I tried to maintain some semblance of normal life. I took the baby to work once, hiding it in my pocket while it floated invisibly. The tiny scout insisted on accompanying us, perched on my shoulder like a glittering parrot with attitude. My coworkers noticed oddities, papers floating mysteriously, pens vibrating, a strange hum in the room, but no one questioned the floating coffee mug. I figured this was fine. Totally fine. Until the baby telepathically informed me that it wanted a mid-morning nap. In my office. On my keyboard. Chaos ensued. Feeding time was the pinnacle of absurdity. I offered baby formula. The baby wrinkled its tiny nose in disgust. The scout sipped in, squawking in a combination of chirps and telepathic eye rolls. Plasma snacks were produced, glowing softly in tiny spheres. I hesitated. I had no idea what they would do to my insides, but the baby's delighted squeals and tiny floating pirouettes convinced me to try one. It was like tasting electricity. Possibly delicious. Definitely alarming. Despite all this, there were moments of tenderness that made my brain short-circuit. Holding both of them, the Scout hovering close, baby cradled in my hand, I realized I was smitten in a way that defied logic. Ridiculous, yes. Impossible, yes. But there was warmth, there was laughter, and there was an undeniable connection that neither physics nor biology could explain. And yes, a tiny telepathic alien telling me I was doing good enough felt deeply validating. Romance, as it turns out, exists in the weirdest forms. I found myself sharing stolen moments with the Scout while the baby floated nearby, imitating our gestures or glowing when we held hands. Sometimes she'd hover impossibly close, wings brushing my skin, and I'd catch a whiff of something vaguely floral and electric. My pulse spiked. Somehow, this chaotic, ridiculous, interspecies household was functioning. Kind of. Sort of. In a way that felt entirely inappropriate for the laws of the universe but perfect for me. By nightfall, we had somehow survived without starting an intergalactic incident, or at least I hoped we had. The baby floated gently in a glowing cocoon the Scout had prepared, and the Scout herself rested on my shoulder, wings twitching contentedly. I sat back, exhausted, glowing with an odd mixture of terror and delight. Life had just turned into a ridiculous, floating, glowing, telepathic circus, and somehow, I was not only surviving, it was exhilarating. And somewhere deep down, I knew this was only the beginning. Life with a floating, glowing hybrid baby and a thumb-sized alien Scout was one thing. Surviving the culture clash that came with it was an entirely different, infinitely more chaotic universe. Mornings were a disaster in slow motion, like a poorly choreographed interstellar ballet with very high stakes and absolutely zero coordination. I would stumble out of bed, half asleep, and immediately be greeted by the Scout zipping around my room, wings vibrating so fast they created tiny breezes that sent my socks flying. The baby would hover nearby, glowing brighter with every misstep I made, as if rating my parenting performance on some alien scale I wasn't aware of. Breakfast alone became a diplomatic negotiation. I tried to give the baby a simple slice of toast. The hybrid wrinkled its tiny glowing nose and floated over to the Scout, telepathically complaining about insufficient plasma levels. The Scout, of course, was appalled that I didn't understand the exact ratio of matter to energy required for a proper baby meal. I found myself stirring glowing orbs of plasma into a bowl, muttering under my breath about how no one in any human parenting book had ever mentioned this. Meanwhile, the baby pirouetted above the counter like it owned the place, occasionally bumping my coffee cup and sending it spilling across my laptop. Bath time was even worse. The Scout insisted on what she called a quantum hydration ritual, which involved suspending the baby in a soft, anti-gravity cocoon and rotating it slowly while chanting something that sounded vaguely like a pop song if played backwards. I was supposed to participate by humming, which I did terribly. The baby laughed, or shrieked, it was hard to tell, floating upside down while sparkling droplets of water hovered around like tiny levitating jewels. I ended up soaked, sticky, and completely mesmerized by the absurd beauty of it all. Somehow, the Scout found my clumsiness endearing, fluttering her wings against my cheek and emitting tiny chirps that felt suspiciously like compliments, or maybe flirtation. Work from home days were slightly better, but only in theory. The baby refused to stay in any kind of human container. A diaper? Pointless. A high chair? Ignored. The Scout insisted on a hovering cradle of her own design that required telepathic attention and precise humming, which meant I spent half my day trying not to look incompetent while simultaneously negotiating an interspecies parenting plan. I developed a nervous habit of muttering apologies to the baby for being human, while the Scout hovered at my shoulder, eyes twitching as though counting every mistake I made. Despite it all, there were moments of hilarity, the baby attempting to feed the Scout by bouncing glowing orbs at her, and the Scout squealing in a mix of delight and mild pain when the orbs hit her head. Romance persisted oddly in the middle of this chaos. Small gestures became meaningful, when the Scout hovered close enough for her wingtip to brush my hand, or when she chirped at me for successfully calming the baby without levitating furniture into orbit. I caught myself leaning toward her in quiet moments, brushing imaginary dust from her tiny glowing form, and feeling a flutter of warmth that had nothing to do with coffee or the heat of the sun. And somehow, the baby sensed it, floating between us like a mischievous mediator, glowing brighter whenever we even hinted at holding hands. Then there were the public appearances. Taking the baby anywhere outside was like trying to smuggle a tiny neon UFO through human society. The Scout insisted on coming along, of course, perching on my shoulder, and immediately drawing curious and confused stares. Grocery stores were the worst. Cereal boxes would levitate, shopping carts would wobble, and the baby would occasionally telepathically broadcast tiny complaints about substandard nutritional quality. I tried to explain, in hushed tones, that this was a perfectly normal child, and that yes, I would pick up the milk, please don't alert the authorities. The Scout chirped in my ear, simultaneously amused and outraged, making it impossible to stay calm. By evening, our apartment was a whirlwind of floating objects, glowing patches of plasma, and the soft hum of alien telepathy. I would collapse on the couch, the baby hovering above a glowing pillow, the Scout curled up on my chest like a tiny, feathered heating pad. I couldn't stop laughing at the absurdity of it all, and I couldn't stop feeling my chest tighten with a strange combination of exhaustion and affection. This chaotic, impossible household, half human, half alien, entirely ridiculous, was somehow the happiest I had ever been. Evenings were for lessons in interspecies diplomacy, a fancy term for trying to get the baby to sleep. The Scout insisted on meditation sessions that involved floating chants and synchronized wing flutters, while I muttered incantations I barely understood and attempted to mimic her movements. The baby would mimic us, glowing brighter with each attempt, occasionally bouncing into a bookshelf or floating into the curtains. I caught the Scout glancing at me, her tiny expression softening in a way that made my stomach flip. The ridiculousness of the situation couldn't diminish the warmth that was spreading between us, two species improbably finding affection in the middle of chaos. By the time the baby finally dozed off, wrapped in a glowing cocoon, I sat back, sticky, exhausted, and grinning. The Scout perched on my shoulder, wings twitching softly, and whispered, telepathically of course, something that made me blush despite myself. Somewhere in the universe, we were probably breaking every rule about interspecies parenting and adult human conduct. Somewhere, the baby's genetic lineage was probably being analyzed for anomalies. But here, in this messy, glowing, chaotic apartment, everything felt absurdly perfect. Just when I thought our little interspecies circus couldn't get any crazier, the universe decided to test me. Mid-morning, as the baby floated lazily above a glowing cocoon and the Scout hovered on my shoulder, a message arrived, not a text, not a call, but a holographic projection that shimmered into existence in the middle of my living room. I nearly fell over. The projection was an alien officer, enormous and intimidating by Scout standards, radiating authority like a supernova, while my thumb-sized Scout fluttered nervously beside me. Apparently, she had supervisors, and apparently, they were very unhappy with her personal choices. The officer's booming voice echoed through my apartment. Scout Solera, your mission report is incomplete. Explain the human bonding. The Scout chirped nervously, fluttering in impossible patterns while I tried to hide behind the couch like a coward. Then it dawned on me. They were here because she had broken intergalactic regulations by imprinting on a human and producing hybrid offspring. Somehow, somewhere, I had gone from an ordinary human to the literal center of an interstellar scandal. Negotiations were interesting. I tried explaining things the human way, waving my arms, mumbling about love, co-parenting, and adaptation. The officer didn't understand a word but seemed vaguely intrigued, or maybe offended, by my enthusiasm. The Scout hovered beside me, chirping little defenses, which translated as, he is an exemplary partner. And adorable in his fumbling human way. The baby, meanwhile, floated between us, glowing brighter with each compliment, telepathically adding its own commentary, Father is acceptable. Very good job. But more snacks next time. Chaos ensued when the officer demanded proof that the hybrid family could function. I had to demonstrate human parenting skills under extreme intergalactic scrutiny while keeping the baby calm and the scout calm. I attempted a morning routine, feeding the baby, ensuring plasma snacks were correctly portioned, and performing a floating bedtime demonstration for an alien that had never met human laziness. The baby gleefully sabotaged my attempts, bouncing into the officer, who blinked in surprise at being gently nudged by a glowing infant. I panicked. The scout flapped her wings so hard she generated a tiny breeze that sent the officer's holographic robes spinning. Somehow, despite all of this, the officer was impressed. Romance didn't take a break in the middle of intergalactic intervention. The scout hovered closer, brushing her wings against my neck, chirping telepathic encouragements like "You are surprisingly competent for a human." I flushed, realizing I had never been complimented in such a chaotic, absurd, and intimate way. The baby joined in, floating between us, glowing like a tiny spotlight that emphasized the ridiculousness of our domestic and interstellar drama. Somehow, despite the chaos, love and connection persisted. And it was weirdly comforting. After what felt like a cosmic eternity of hovering, bouncing, glowing, and nervous explanations, the officer finally sighed, or whatever the alien equivalent was, and relented. The scout could remain with me and the baby, provided the hybrid child was properly cared for, and I agreed to adult lessons in interspecies etiquette. I nodded frantically, too exhausted to protest. The baby squealed happily, floating upside down in approval, and the scout chirped in delight, wings twitching so fast they created tiny whirlwinds. I slumped onto the couch, sticky, tired, glowing slightly from residual plasma energy, and laughed until my ribs ached. Life didn't magically become normal after that. Our routines remained chaotic. Breakfast involved interdimensional pancakes sprinkled with starlight sugar. Bath time required hovering rituals, telepathic humming, and occasional dodging of mischievous floating orbs. Work was still a delicate dance of hiding glowing infants and tiny scouts from unsuspecting coworkers. And yet, through all of it, something had changed. The absurdity of the situation no longer felt like disaster, it felt like home. Romance had grown in unexpected ways. The scout would curl up on my shoulder at night, wings brushing my neck, while the baby floated between us like a tiny mischievous mediator. We shared quiet moments amidst chaos, brushing the baby's glowing hair, exchanging telepathic jokes, holding hands while floating across the room. Love, it seemed, didn't care about size, species, or absurd intergalactic rules. It simply existed, chaotic, bright, and impossible to ignore. Even adult humor persisted, naturally. The baby's telepathic commentary on our private moments, the scout's tiny squeaks when I fumbled in affectionate gestures, and my own panicked reactions created a continuous loop of laughter and awkward intimacy. I realized that living with them was like juggling fire, electricity, and glue, messy, dangerous, sometimes slightly painful, but oddly thrilling. And for once in my life, I wouldn't have it any other way. By the time evening rolled around, I was sitting in my glowing, messy apartment, the scout curled on my chest, the baby floating beside us, and a profound sense of absurd joy washing over me. The universe had handed me chaos, responsibility, and impossible romance in one neat, glowing package. Somehow, I had survived. Somehow, we had survived. And somehow, against all odds, I had a family that was utterly ridiculous, completely unconventional, and entirely, wonderfully mine. And as the baby drifted into a soft glow of sleep, the scout snuggled against me, and I took a deep breath. I realized something that had eluded me all my life. Happiness wasn't about perfection. It wasn't about normalcy. It wasn't even about following the rules of your species, or any other species for that matter. Happiness, I discovered, was floating through life with two tiny, glowing, chaotic creatures who had stolen your heart, and realizing you wouldn't have it any other way.